The Charge of the Light Brigade, by Alfred Lord Tennyson, is a narrative poem published in 1854 in the Examiner, which was a leading intellectual journal of the time. Britain and France, as allies of Sardinia and the Ottoman Empire, had declared war on Russia in March of that year over control of the Crimea, a peninsula on the north coast of the Black Sea. In the poem, Tennyson tells the story of the failed attack of the Light Brigade on a Russian artillery battery during the Battle of Balaclava in September 1854. Tennyson was inspired to write the poem after reading an article in the Times on the 13th of November 1854, which suggested that the order to attack had been a terrible mistake or blunder, a word which the poet includes in the poem. A series of miscommunications had led to an order for the 673-man Light Brigade to prevent a contingent of Russians from carrying away captured Turkish guns being misinterpreted as an order to make a suicidal frontal assault on a different artillery battery, comprising 20 battalions and more than 50 artillery pieces, which had been deployed on both sides and at the opposite end of a valley. A Light Brigade comprised lightly armoured troops mounted on horses, usually armed with swords, spears or bows. It was customary for them to be used for operations such as patrols, skirmishes and reconnaissance. So they were completely unsuitable and ill-equipped for the enemy they were facing. Brandishing only their sabres, the Light Brigade followed the orders and charged on the well-fortified and well-armed Russian army, which attacked them from three sides. Predictably, they suffered heavy losses and were forced to retreat. Only 195 soldiers of the original 673 returned, and 475 horses were lost. The poem is a celebration of self-sacrifice, heroism, and doing your duty in the face of impossible odds. The poem consists of 6 stanzas which have a base metre of dactylic dimeter, 6-syllable lines with a rhythm of dum-diddy, dum-diddy. The dactylic metre helps to evoke not only the galloping of the horse's hooves, but also the noise of the initial explosion from the cannon shells and the subsequent dying away of the sound. Tennyson does vary this rhythm, however, with hypercatalectic lines, where the poet adds an extra syllable on the end, and a significant number of catalectic lines, where the poet removes a syllable from the end of the line. The poem reportedly took only a few minutes to write, which might explain the irregularity of the form and structure. This is, however, very effective, as it helps to evoke the chaos of the action on the battlefield. Stanzas vary in length from 6 to 12 lines, and there is no fixed rhyme scheme. Some lines have no rhymes at all. Some lines have 2 or 3 adjacent lines with single or masculine rhyme. Others have a double or feminine rhyme. In places there are lines with identical rhymes, and in others, lines have forced or oblique rhymes. There is also heavy use of different repetition techniques, such as anaphora, epistrophe, epizeuxis, anadiplosis, and symplasy, which results in the reader being bombarded with repetitive language, echoing the way in which the soldiers are being relentlessly bombarded with shells. Tennyson makes use of a refrain at the end of each stanza, which varies as the poem progresses, to summarise the progression of the battle in relation to the 600. The first stanza begins in medias res, which dramatically plunges the reader straight into the middle of the action without any explanation or exposition. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward. A league is an archaic way of measuring distance and is equal to about 3 miles. So the cavalry has to travel about 1.5 miles up the valley in order to attack the Russians, as the weapons with which they are armed are only suitable for hand-to-hand combat. The type of repetition that Tennyson uses here is called epizeuxis, which is repetition of a word or phrase in immediate succession, i.e. without any other intervening words. The use of this technique in conjunction with a dactylic rhythm gives the poem momentum and mimics the galloping hooves of the horses. Note the anastrophe in the following 2 lines. All in the valley of death rode the 600. Anastrophe is where a writer chooses to invert the usual order of words within a sentence. This sentence would normally be rendered something like, all of the 600 rode in the valley of death. The employment of this technique here serves to give prominence to the metaphor, the valley of death, which not only alludes to Psalm 23 in the Bible, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, but also creates a sense of doom, as the soldiers' fate has already been decided before they mount their charge. This manipulation of the syntax also allows variations of the phrase rode the 600 to become a refrain at the end of each stanza, and lends the poem a feeling of grandeur and solemnity. Note also the forced or oblique rhyme of onward and hundred. The discord in this rhyme is jarring and helps to convey the idea that something terrible is about to happen. The poet introduces direct speech to bring the narrative to life. Forward, the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. The officer giving the command is nameless and faceless in Tennyson's poem, although it is likely that he is referring to Captain Louis Edward Nolan, who misinterpreted the written order and died within the first few minutes at the head of the charge. This use of a personal pronoun serves to keep the attention off those in charge and firmly on the heroic troops who unquestioningly carry out the order. The repetition of the lines into the valley of death rode the 600 increases the sense of doom. The second stanza begins with a repetition of the command, forward the Light Brigade, which draws our attention to the fateful words of a misinterpreted order which is going to end in slaughter. The rhetorical question, was there a man dismayed, highlights their bravery by conveying the idea that not a single one of the men balk at the command. The next 2 lines, not though the soldiers knew someone had blundered, can be interpreted in one of 2 ways according to what the not is referring to. Is it referring to dismayed? If so, that would suggest that the soldiers know exactly what they are being asked to do, that it is an obvious mistake, but that they obey in spite of this. Or is it referring to new, in which case this suggests that the Light Brigade enter the charge in good faith, in the belief that their superiors have evaluated this offensive and that the charge is strategically sound. Either way, the reader is left with a feeling of horror that these brave men are going into battle like lambs to the slaughter. Tennyson took the word blundered from the newspaper article that he had read. The word has connotations of stupidity and carelessness, and there is an implicit contrast with the nobility and heroism of the soldiers. Tennyson uses anaphora in the next 3 lines. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. The use of the personal possessive pronoun theirs is shorthand for it wasn't their duty. As soldiers, it was not their duty to answer back or to question the orders. It was their duty, and their only duty, highlighted by the word but, to carry them out and die as a result. The very simple language reflects the humility and simple stoicism of the men, and the alliteration of the hard d sounds in do and die link the inevitability of their deaths to their duty. The stanza ends on the refrain, "Into the valley of death rode the 600, as the brigade presses on towards its inexorable defeat." At the beginning of the third stanza, the brigade has arrived. They are being fired on by heavy artillery from all sides. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them volleyed and thundered. Here, Tennyson uses a repetition technique called simplicy. Simplicy is a combination of anaphora, which is repetition of words or phrases at the beginning of successive clauses, and epistrophe, which is repetition of words or phrases at the end of successive clauses. This technique enhances the description of the men being completely surrounded by the heavy artillery. The monotony and relentless rhythm of these lines help to convey the claustrophobia the men must have been feeling. The verbs volleyed and thundered evoke the bombardment of the shells and the deafening noise. The verb stormed at, in the line stormed at with shot and shell, picks up on the verb thundered in the preceding line and helps the reader visualise the apocalyptic scenes on the battlefield, enhanced by the sibilant alliteration in this line, which conjures the hissing sounds of the shells as they fly through the air. The men remain brave, focused and disciplined, though, as in spite of the conditions, boldly they rode and well. Tennyson personifies death, which in his imagination becomes a terrible beast that is going to eat them. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600, and highlights how small they are in comparison to the Russian army. Note that the refrain is now 3 lines as the action builds to a crescendo. Tennyson's use of anaphora here enhances the sense of relentless forward motion and inevitable doom. At the beginning of the 4th stanza, the brigade has reached the Russian army and is engaged in combat. The anaphoric verb flashed suggests speed and dexterity, as the brigade first unsheathes its sabres, which were heavy cavalry swords with curved blades and single cutting edges, and then begins to strike at the enemy. The way in which they turned in air suggests agility and grace, whilst sabring the gunners demonstrates the extent to which the brigade, even though at a disadvantage, manages to wound or kill a number of the enemy. All the while, all the world wondered. Here it is likely that Tennyson means that the world was in a state of wonder and awe at the bravery and self-sacrifice of the brigade, rather than that they were wondering what was going on. Meanwhile, back on the battlefield, the brigade plunged in the battery smoke. The bombardment of the shot and shell has created a lot of dense smoke, making visibility poor. The brigade, however, launches itself undeterred into the unknown with speed and energy to breach the Russian line. Despite their overwhelming advantage, Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. They're knocked for 6 as the British hit them hard and break and tear them apart. The sibilance in these lines helps to evoke the hissing sound of the sabres as they swipe through the air. The refrain changes to reveal that the brigade is much diminished by the battle. Then they rode back, but not the 600. The repetition of not in the form of epizeuxis again emphasises that they may have gone into the battle as a unit, but they have not come out of this unscathed, and that there are many casualties. The tone of these lines is quite mournful. The fifth stanza describes their retreat from the battle as they once more have to run the gauntlet of the banks of cannons lining their route. The first 5 lines are almost identical to the first 5 lines of the third stanza. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell. Tennyson employs simplicity once more to convey how their retreat is just as fraught with danger as the charge, although this time the cannon are behind them. Tennyson now focuses on the casualties, while horse and hero fell. The men have now been elevated to heroes. They are no longer merely men or soldiers. Note the alliteration of horse and hero, which enhances the image of the carnage and chaos on the battlefield, as the cannons indiscriminately target their enemy, and both man and beast fall. Tennyson uses epistrophe in the next 2 lines. Rather than into the jaws of death and into the mouth of hell, as in the third stanza, the men are coming through the jaws of death and back from the mouth of hell. Once more, Tennyson varies the refrain, this time by using anadiplosis, where a word or words from the end of one clause are repeated at the beginning of the next. All that was left of them, left of 600. The use of the word left, emphasised by being placed on the stressed syllable of the dactylic foot in both cases, highlights the heavy losses sustained and creates a mournful tone as we see how the brigade has been substantially diminished and is no longer complete. The final stanza is the shortest in the poem, at only 6 lines long. Tennyson now focuses on the Light Brigade's legacy. The rhetorical question suggests that their glory shall never fade, and this poem, one of the most famous in the English language, has done much to immortalise them. The second line, "Oh, the wild charge they made," is an exclamation as Tennyson, overcome by emotion, wants us to remember the desperate bravery of the men. All the world wondered. All the world is in awe of these men and their ultimate act of self-sacrifice. The poem ends on 2 commands as Tennyson exhorts his readers to honour the charge they made, honour the Light Brigade, noble 600. His message is clear. We should remember and respect these noble war heroes, whether they have survived or have fallen. In this stanza, 4 of the 6 lines have masculine or single rhyme, and the other 2 lines have a forced or oblique double rhyme. All the rhyming words are consonant. They all share a d as their final sound, which makes it sound heavy, helping to evoke the solemnity of both the event and how Tennyson feels about it. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature text.